I guess we can start. At least officially, we have to start at this time. We have a lot of things to do. We have a lot of speakers that want to tell us very interesting stuff. So we're short in time, and I guess we can start by, I just want to start by thanking all of you for joining this roundtable right now. Um, and in those times that are not very easy, and uh, for those of you who um, uh, listen to me, I hope you can hear me well. We don't have any technical problems, and everything will be fine. So I wanted to start with some housekeeping rules. If you have, during our discussion, if you will have any questions, you can just write them to the chat that we have here. If you don't know where to find it, it's just underneath all of these videos that we have here. And another thing that I would ask you to do, that you're doing well actually right now, is to switch off your microphones during the discussion, because we will have echo if you would switch it on. So today's discussion will be about China, about world's second biggest economy, and the country where this pandemic that keeps us all in our houses right now started, in the city of Wuhan. And I want to thank all of the experts that agreed to spend their Friday night for that roundtable. And I hope it will be interesting for all of us. Okay, so I just want to share my screen right now. And yeah, can you see it? Great. All right. So it all started more than 100 days ago, in a city of Wuhan. You can see it, how the government of China had to just close the country. You can see on the map that almost all of the regions of China were under lockdown because of the pandemic. And this was the major reason for the economic crisis that we will be talking about today. For now, the situation there stabilized, and pandemic is going on in other places of the world right now. In Russia, the most serious situation right now in the United States of America. And if we look at what China has been through for all these times, and what are they doing, I guess it will be very helpful for other countries, for other governments to look at the Chinese authorities' behavior, at what were the instruments that they used, what were the mechanisms that they're using till today. And for that, I want to ask our great specialists, starting maybe with Vasily Nosov. Vasily, he's a macroeconomist and China watcher at the same time, and author of Carnegie Moscow Center. When it all started, you published an article about the consequences, possible consequences at that time for the Chinese economy. What has changed right now? Do you think that the crisis in China at the moment is the biggest crisis that they're facing that they faced throughout their modern history?
First of all, thank you so much, Timur, for inviting me for this discussion. Definitely, uh, everything has changed since the 3rd of February, just because, let's be honest, no one at the beginning of February can even predict such a scale, uh, such figures of people who are sick, and the number of death cases. It was just, I guess, as far as I have read, based on uh, what what analytics I read several months ago. No, almost no one can predict such a scale of the epidemic, and definitely. The current crisis is the biggest crisis for modern China since the crisis caused by the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution. And just a brief look at figures showed us that the lowest GDP growth since 1976 was were in 1989, 1990. In that time, annual growth rate was about 4%. That nowadays, for this figure for the year 2020 seems. It looks like it would be very difficult for China, for the Chinese economy to reach such a rate, such a growth rate. Um, Obviously, in the first quarter of 2020, the Chinese GDP decreased, and the dynamics of macroeconomic indicators such as industrial production, investment, retail sales, retail trade, was negative in January, February, as well as the dynamics of exports, of imports, and actually a lot of other economic indicators. The official figure for the first quarter will be published next Tuesday, as far as I remember. And nowadays, forecasts of the Chinese GDP contraction vary a lot from -4 to -9% year over year. And the projections for the whole year also differ a lot. And the average consensus forecast, based on what I've read, is about 3% this year for China. Uh, but at the same time, the negative scenario provided by the World Bank assumes that China could see zero growth this year, and that would be the lowest figure since 1976. Well, as for the financial market, nowadays financial market doesn't show signs of a severe crisis. Timur, could we switch to the next slide, please? Yeah, thanks a lot. And we could see that that financial markets nowadays, financial markets dynamics is not such frightful, and partly because of the government measures that were undertaken to support the economy, and partly due to the simple fact that China is the first country that was hit by the coronavirus, and consequently China is the first country lifted the quarantine regime and got back to the normal. Of course, not the same normal as it was the previous year, but at least not the same that was in February. And since the European economy, since the United States economy are also faced a lot of problems, and just caused by the coronavirus outbreak. Nowadays, global investors have no other variants where to invest their money. In fact, so they just stay in Chinese bonds, in, just stay in renminbi, not just because it is not obvious at all what would be with exchange market, foreign exchange market, just in several months. So since the beginning of February, the People Bank of China has undertaken different steps, like they had cut rates, like reserve repo rate, like the required reserve rate, and and there were two rounds of cuts. They cut excess reserve rate, and in common, net liquidity injection could reach up to almost something about 2.5 trillion RMB. And moreover, according to Xinhua and to Reuters sources, Politburo members already agreed on some new fiscal stimulus package and the new issue of sovereign debt. But the final figures would be announced only on the two sessions meeting that was delayed due to the coronavirus outbreak, and we still don't know the final date. And again, according to Reuters sources, the total amount of this fiscal stimulus package could reach up to 2.8 trillion RMB. So these figures, in fact, are almost equal to those of the 2008 year stimulus package. Well, as for the global effect and as for some projections, in fact, I guess that the main problem with forecasting of current crisis economic consequences and the depth of the crisis, the main problem is that this crisis is caused by the epidemic factor, not the economic or financial reasons. And obviously, this year's global economic growth would be negative, but the projections will change each month. Just a simple example, from the 23rd of March to the 9th of April, Goldman Sachs had changed its global GDP forecast from -1 to -2%. And so in fact, it means that nowadays with the lockdown of the US economy, in fact, of some lockdown of European economy, I guess that it's just almost impossible to predict some figures. And what lies on an optimistic side is that this crisis had no structural roots. And in simple words, the current crisis was caused by the government steps aimed at the radical restrictions on the consumption demand. And admittedly, these steps are reasonable due to the epidemic situation. But it's crucial to understand that in the post-coronavirus epoch, and we all believe that we will get back to normal in several months, and market forces and market mechanisms would be almost the same with maybe, of course, some growth of the share of e-commerce, digital markets, so on. But the whole structure of the market would not face some dramatic changes. And obviously, governments will face the necessity of widening fiscal spending and implementation of some additional monetary stimulus, but it will definitely result in the global economic growth slowdown for several years. But at least the current situation doesn't require to invent new economic model, how it was like during the Great Depression in the 30th years of the previous century. I guess that are main points that I can say about the current crisis, but we still have to look what it would result in.
Yeah, sure. Things are not in the final destination right now. We're not at the final destination at the moment. I'm looking at the slide that you have of government support. It seems to me that those are unprecedented things that Chinese government want to do to, somehow help the economy to not die completely. Do you think some of the things that China is doing can be borrowed or followed by other states? Can, for example, Russia look at what is happening there and think of its own policies based on the experience of China or other states? Is the experience of Chinese authorities applicable to other economies?
Yeah, definitely. definitely other governments can borrow some steps, some approaches from the Chinese experience. I guess that since the main factor of the current crisis is that the consumption demand is almost at zero level, just because it is only one reasonable, only one effective step to fight against the epidemic is just not just to decrease the consumption demand almost to zero. And in that case, the main problem is that people who cannot who can probably lose their jobs, they should be provided by some way to find financing just to continue their just to adopt their life conditions to the new situation, but not to lose too much. And usually in that situation, small and medium enterprises mostly face the most serious problems, and that is I guess that is the most most effective measure, just to provide small and medium enterprises with extremely cheap money, with extremely cheap loans. And as we could see on the graph that illustrates the aggregate demand, the aggregate financing and monetary aggregate M2, we could see that in March, the growth of M2 aggregate, M2 is just broad money. It's just all, in simple words, is all money that you got in your economy. And we see that the growth of the volume of the economy, of money in the economy, reached 10% year over year. So it is the highest level for several years, just because it is the Chinese government understood that it was the moment that they should provide all the economy with all money businesses and companies are requested for.
Okay. Thank you so much. And this, I want to turn to Raisi Pishina, if I may. It seems that this crisis will hit them is in the demand, that people don't buy stuff, and Chinese economy depends on it a lot. And it seems like the most serious reason for that is that most of them don't have jobs right now. And what is the consequence of COVID-19 crisis for Chinese labor market? Raisa Alexeyevna?
Yes, hear you. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, if anything keeps Li Keqiang up at night, that is probably labor market in China and unemployment rate. So I will just talk a little bit about unemployment in China amid this coronavirus crisis. And then, if I may, I would like to talk a tiny little bit about the other market that I find extremely interesting and important to cover. I will try to not to take too much time and to take like about 10 minutes. So when we talk about unemployment statistics in China, we know that it is widely known to be unreliable, and we know that there is registered urban unemployment, which is around 4%, and then there is survey unemployment data. And in January, February, it rose to 6.2%, which is a lot in a country which has had the labor statistics that hasn't changed for decades, this rise is extremely disturbing. What does it mean? What does the 6.2% mean for the economy? It doesn't sound like a big number, actually. And in many respects, it is not a very big number. But again, what we know about China's labor statistics is that it's unreliable, but we also know that it shows us trends. And we see the clear trend that unemployment is rising. And if we look at official data, it means that about 27.4 million people are unemployed now. At the same time, there are independent estimates which estimate unemployment at over 200 million. So as you can see, the numbers vary a lot, but in any case, it remains one of the most important topics in China. And what I see from the discussions of Chinese economists and their publications in Chinese press, they talk a lot about what costs China should take now that it's fighting the consequences of the crisis. And the most recent publication was about the importance of putting people on top of the priorities and enabling the economy to provide people with jobs. The problem with unemployment in China is that there is a lot of hidden unemployment in the Chinese economy. And we also know that there is frictional unemployment. And frictional unemployment means that there are millions of people who still want to return to their workplaces, but they can't, and they couldn't during the February-March period due to travel restrictions. These estimates also vary a lot, but economists talk about several 100 million people who found themselves in this situation when they wanted to return to jobs and weren't sure if they would be able to return to their workplaces. Another interesting and important point that I would like to make is that several years ago, when I was presenting another paper on labor market in China, I mainly talked about state-owned enterprises and the risks related to state-owned sector of the Chinese economy. Nowadays, we're talking about the services, and we are talking about 180 million jobs in services that were lost. And this is the result of the restructuring of the Chinese economy. As China is becoming more and more service-oriented, services are becoming more vulnerable to these shocks. And it is not clear whether services will be able to absorb laid-off workers. Because when you look back at the Chinese history, we know that back in the day when people were laid off from their state-owned jobs, they could still find new jobs in small and medium-sized enterprises. They still provide about 80% of jobs in China, and they still produce about 60% of China's GDP, and it's not clear how they will cope with the crisis. Like Vasily just said, the Chinese government has come up with a number of measures to support the economy, like reserve rate cuts and fiscal stimulus. And as always, they're going to use their state-owned enterprises as an instrument to support employment. And that's again puts services sector at this questionable position. And the most vulnerable categories in the Chinese labor market haven't changed. They remain the same today as they were several years ago, and they have been for years actually. And these are migrant workers. And we've read a lot about migrant workers who were stuck in their home provinces, who went home during the Lunar New Year and they couldn't return. And it actually affected the speed of recovery, these travel restrictions. Another vulnerable category is recent graduates. And according to some estimates, this year about 9 million graduates are going to leave universities. And it is questionable whether they will be able to find jobs in the current economy. And they have had problems finding jobs for years. And now, amid this crisis, it's very unclear how it will turn out. And I would like to say a few words about another market that I find interesting. It's actually not the market in China, but the market that is affected by the situation in China's economy. And that is international student market. Being teaching at the universities, I find it extremely important, and we all find ourselves in this situation where we had to switch to online teaching immediately because of the situation, the corona crisis. We often forget that this student market is so big, and we often neglect that finances of many leading institutions, of many leading universities in the world are dependent on foreign students. And China is the largest exporter, so to speak, of foreign students. Chinese spend an estimated of 30 billion a year on overseas tuition fees. That's a lot. And if you add up their living expenses, if you add up, say, their travel expenses and whatever expenses, whatever other expenses they have in a country where they study, it means that they spend a lot of money where they study. And it is very unclear how the global education market is going to evolve after the crisis is over, because we know that prestigious institutions from Harvard to London School of Economics and a lot of other top schools, they shut down their dormitories. They switched to online classes, and they left Chinese students and a lot of other foreign students with no opportunity to study in this foreign environment, to live in this country, which makes little sense for them to stay and to continue their studies. And some of the interviews with students I saw online are very troubling, so to speak, because they really tell how they discuss this topic with their parents, and they believe that it makes no sense for them to stay and to spend money for online classes when they're stuck at their apartments and unable to talk to anyone live. So this business model of global education market is going to change, and China being a huge, a very important player in this market affects it a lot. And this crisis is probably going to change the global education market. And this is pretty much all that I wanted to say. If you have any questions, I would love to answer.
Thank you very much. I think those points were really important, especially about international student market that we don't think about, but at the same time, I think all of us have some of the friends or relatives or acquaintances that are facing some problems because of crisis, not only in China, but all around the world.
You see, Timur, if I may just to add a couple of words.
Yeah.
Sure. I will just give you an example of Australia. In Australia, 11% of all students studying in Australia are Chinese. That means Australian and foreign students. So among all these students studying in Australia, 11% are from China. And this is a huge hit on the Australian education system and on many other education systems around the world.
Yeah, insane. Thank you so much. I guess we can turn now to some questions about the future of Chinese economy. What can we predict? What based on the information that we have right now? What can we think of the future growth or maybe decline of Chinese economy? And Vasily Lemotov from N Plus and one of the co-founders of Sinatech Telegram channel can help us with that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Timur, for inviting me for this event. And I would like to say that I'm really proud to be among such experienced, seasoned China watchers like Vasily and Raisa. And so I would like first to say a couple of words about the crisis itself, and then to take a broad look on the state of the Chinese economy, maybe taking succinct and avoiding some points that Vasily and Reis already said, just to not to waste time. So first, I think the very important point is that if we remember the previous crisis, like 2008 global crisis, 2001 dot-com bubble, 1998 Asian crisis, 1987 Black Monday in the US, they were all connected with finance. And only then there was some impact on the real sector. This year, it all started with rapidly falling demand, just as Vasily said, and economy-wide lockdowns. So it's a real sector crisis first. Yes, I totally agree with Vasily that the structure, the overall economic structure will stay the same. And moreover, as famous Nassim Taleb said a couple of days ago, it's not a black swan. It's a crisis that could be predicted in time. Of course, almost everybody didn't imagine that it could turn out that we will all sit at home for days and for weeks. But still, there was a lot of time for market players to reassess asset prices. And so it was quite a predictable crisis. But still, though it is the optimistic point, the crisis, as the crisis touched the real sector first, it can be more painful to the general public. It's just not some like Wall Street guys out of their job, but it's a lot of small and medium enterprises that are closed down, and and there are a lot of people that desperately need financial help. And moreover, if even if we recover from this crisis quite quickly, still there are some sectors like steel and aluminum that take much longer to recover than the others. Like, for example, I heard that in Europe, in several countries, mainly in Italy and in France, some companies had to shut down completely the steel mills. And in order to recover from it, in order to recover, they will need months or maybe years, and the demand for base metals, the demand for such things will rise, and so the end prices may also rise. I think it's also a very important implication. If we look to China specifically, at the moment it may not be the biggest crisis for China, at least for now. Because the economy, as we see, is quite quickly recovering from lockdowns, and since it's more and more oriented on the domestic demand, exports are a bit less important for the countries. So it's quite a good situation, but still China has less space to maneuver. Can we move to the first slide, actually, with the GDP growth? Just as Vasily said, there are a lot of predictions on GDP growth, but they are all really pessimistic. And we know that the growth has slowed down before the crisis for many years. And yes, in the worst case scenario, in the stress scenario, the growth may be really zero. Let's move on to the next slide. I think the very important part that is that the cost of overcoming the previous crisis with a huge 4 trillion yuan stimulus package, the cost of it was the acceleration of non-performing loans, of shadow banking, And though shadow banking, as we see, is declining for now, bad debt still persists. And so maybe the large-scale infrastructure-oriented stimulus today may have even worse consequences than it had in 2008. And so before discussing how China is addressing the crisis, what is it doing today? First, let's look at what coronavirus lockdowns actually did to the economy. So first, some seemingly good news. In March, purchase managers index is up again. But in fact, though something that it is a good indicator, it isn't quite surprising because the figures over 50 all indicate business activity expansion, and it's actually obvious that after lockdown there is some growth and some expansion, but sustained growth may be declared only after 3 consecutive months of PMI over 50. And but as of today, can you move to the next slide, please? The actual output may be stuck at 80 or 85%. On the left side, we see what Bloomberg estimated as of the 20th of March. The output was around 85%, and Trivium on the right side estimates its latest estimates of maybe yesterday or some days ago. It's still on 80 with 80 something %, and it may be worrying. Let's move on to exports. Exports are experiencing a much expected fall. And in the first 2 months, they dropped, just as it was said, 17% year on year. And China's container processing volumes also fell. However, the worst things for exports may be ahead, just because we don't know the figures for the US and the EU countries yet. And so here are some predictions. And as you see, some analysts say that actually the dynamics can be awful, and so the Chinese exports to US and to EU also would be not very good. But still, exports are, I think, not a very good predictor for the Chinese economy today. Because today the service sector in the economy is more and more important, and the major driver behind its expansion is the household demand. So let's move on a little bit. What the next slide is. Well, yes, it's just about that the export that isn't that important today. And so as for the service sector, we see that, yes, just as Raisa said, 6.2% unemployment rate in January and February. It means plus 5 million people out of work. And it is only about those who are out of employment in urban areas. To be a bit more exact, Liu Chunjie, chief economist at Fund Upright Asset, says that maybe 205 million workers are into frictional unemployment now. And the bulk of job losses took place in the service sector. So it is a huge number, a huge figure, and China has to do something with it, but it has less and less instruments to do it, because more and more employment accounts for private enterprises. And so there is less space to directly regulate employment. So on the next slide, we can see what is happening to consumer loan balance. Consumer lending is a good predictor of consumer spending, actually. And we see that as unemployment takes a toll, consumer lending falls, and it's a sharp drop. It's the first sharp drop in a decade. And in the coming months, we may also see non-performing consumer loans surge. However, it may not be the biggest problem, since household debt is not the biggest debt in the debt structure of Chinese financial system. So what does the government, how does the government address this crisis? Let's move on to the next slide. As we see here, there are a lot of measures that People's Bank of China has taken, but still we haven't seen any like centralized, organized stimulus, just like it was in 2008 for trillion yuan stimulus for just infrastructure investments and the other things. It is particularly interesting because today we see how the US implemented $2 trillion stimulus package. Japan has implemented almost 1 trillion, and EU has signed just yesterday, as far as I remember, 600 billion euros. But here we don't see any particular like statement that will have a huge stimulus. We see a lot of smaller measures. So, for example, pouring money through reverse repos, through cuts of reserve requirement ratio, and lowering the rate on excess reserves on banks in the central bank. People's Bank of China also encouraged financing of small and medium enterprises, and I think it's a very important thing. Just as Raisa said, that 60% of the employed are employed in small and medium enterprises, and but still it's not clear. It's not clear actually if this money will really reach small and medium enterprises, because Chinese state banks have a big track record of just they don't like to lend to SMEs, small and medium businesses, and many economists just think that a lot of money may not just reach the people, the businesses which need it. And now for I think the last slide here. As we see, and just as Vasily said, infrastructure projects, funding for infrastructure projects is growing. They do it through special purpose local government bonds, and even before the coronavirus crisis, they started ramping up special purpose government bonds for infrastructure projects, and maybe that they started to stimulate the economy a bit earlier than the coronavirus crisis happened. It may explain why Chinese government today takes gradual steps, but not some extremely big one package just to stimulate the economy. So do we have any other slides here? I think we have one more.
We'll have one more.
So I think it is the overall picture of what was happening as of March, of 20th of March. The total figure of different kinds of support was around 3 trillion yuan, and today it is even more. Actually, I think the main point here is that the support is just spread evenly across different sectors, across different channels, and it's not that bad actually, because Maybe it will help to diminish the debt risk, the bad debt risk, and to channel funds to the projects and to the businesses that really need it, just except the small and medium enterprises, which I doubt. So actually,
Yes.
sum it up. This crisis is, for now, is not the biggest one for China, but it can be because of falling demand and consumer behavior. So if the consumption, the household consumption, won't just return to the norm, we may see the sustained fall in service sector. It may be really painful for the Chinese economy as we know it today. And the stimulus is implemented, I think it's implemented cleverer, it's implemented better than it was back in 2008. So it may have more impact, but still the small and medium enterprises question persists.
Thank you so much, Vasily, for a lot of very important information for us. I guess now when we have all of this information in our hands and we have this background and we understand what is going on in China at the moment, we can now deep into some of the spheres, some of the other parts of economy and parts of Chinese life. And at the beginning, I would like to turn into tech sphere, which is the thing that Chinese government is proud of, and many people, when think about China now, think about Chinese technology. And Aliya Safina, a student of RANEPA IBS, will help us and talk about what are the consequences of COVID-19 crisis for technology industry. Aliya?
Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed so far, and I would like to dwell on the digital transformation of Chinese companies. We have seen the efficiency of Chinese risk management with its prompt and draconian measures. So many companies were able to move beyond the crisis response to recovery and post-recovery planning. So according to the last International Data Corporation surveys conducted in China, 65% of industrial users already formulated their plans for working from home, while 20% are planning to implement telecommuting. Analysts also pointed out some positive impacts of COVID-19 on businesses. You can see them on the left side of the slide. So it's obvious that COVID-19 has demonstrated the value of IT and digital transformation, and many companies started to recognize it. And next slide, please. This novel coronavirus has offered plenty of opportunities for tech companies to operate in new fields. For example, the Chinese tech giants started to cooperate with public health system by providing finance to support medical supplies and some scientific researches, and also for organizing some free online consultation in order to reduce the number of cross-infection cases in hospitals. Moreover, I'm sure you've heard about some digital passes and other special applications like color QR codes that indicate whether a person can travel freely or should undergo the 2 weeks quarantine. And also artificial intelligence for analyzing computerized tomographies. Usually it takes a doctor from 5 to 15 minutes to analyze it whereas the artificial intelligence system can complete the whole process just within 20 seconds. And we should expect that COVID-19 will change the businesses and the society. The businesses, how they operate, and our consumer behavior, and our preferences. So we can see the four potential and possible shifts on the next slide. Two of them we already discussed. It's teleworking and healthcare delivery. And Raisa Alexeyevna also pointed out the online education, because students were forced to stay indoors, and some companies, for example, social video platform Kuaishou, partnered with the Chinese Ministry of Education and promoted some online education offerings to compensate for the universities and schools closures. And the final trend is development of digital channels. Okay, yeah, the final one is development of digital channels. So companies started to cancel their offline campaigns and reinvest their resources to online marketing, WeChat platforms, and cooperation with online-to-online platforms in order to take advantages of the outbreak and beyond the coronavirus. So I think that we can say for now which of these trends will stick for the long term, but I'm sure that companies will reconsider their strategies, their risk management approaches in accordance with digital transformation. That's it.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to a very interesting topic. I found it, at least, about robotization. Alessia, are you here?
I'm here.
Great. I would ask you to, if I may just interrupt our discussion about technology. I forgot that we have a chat, and now I'm getting back to it, and I see that we have a question. Yeah, we have a question for Raisa. If you may just
Yeah, of course.
answer. Yeah, but because this is really interesting about international student markets, and this is all where we are right now.
Okay, so the question is about the possibility of China becoming the education exporter rather than importer, right? This is exactly what is happening, actually, what has been happening over the past several years. And you all are well aware of all sorts of educational programs for foreign students who are welcome to go to China and study there. However, one should see the majors that students take in China, or say in the United States, for example. So if you look at China's educational programs, they differ in terms of subjects. They differ in geography. For example, most students who go to study in China go on language study programs. Not all of them, but most of them. Students from the developed countries go to study in China, mostly to learn the Chinese language rather than to study biotechnology or something else. And China actually has been very interested in sending Chinese students abroad in order to support China's transformation and China's digitalization and further industrialization, because studying in foreign countries, they were encouraged to take programs in most advanced sciences and advanced technologies, and then to go back to China and to make their contribution into China's development and technological development. And this is probably how I'm going to return to you, and Alice will probably continue talking about robotization. Guys, hello?
Yeah, that would be a great bridge from education to robotization. Alisa, floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm here. So first of all, good afternoon to everyone. And now we will talk about robotization in China. And the main thing about robotization in China is that nowadays this country is a market leader in robotics, and during the last 5 years, it was increasing its share, and in 2018, the country has reached 36% of global supply of industrial robots, and there are several regions which are leading in China. They are Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu, 3 provinces. So this increase in robotization in China mainly connected with government policy there, and even in the 15th 5-year plan, the government was talking about building Xiaokan society, which means that argued that they need to transform the economy into high tech to achieve this goal. And another proof of the Chinese government policy to transform the economy into high tech one is Made in China 2022 plan. In this plan, there were mentioned 10 major industries, and of course, robotics was one of them. So we can move to the next slide, and here are some advantages of robotics and why the country really needs to transform its economy. First of all, in the situation of the global slowdown in the growing of economies, and of course in China it's also slowing down, and specialization of national economy in the production of low value added products, and the problem with aging population and increasing labor costs. The government is really interested in this transformation, and because I want to explain that if the labor cost in China is rising, this means that since 2008 till 2018, the salaries, annual salaries of employees in urban areas of China increased from 28,000 yuan to 82,000 yuan per year. So it's clearly this growth of salaries shows that clearly shows that costs are rising. And if these costs are rising, China can fall into the middle income trap, because the production will cost more, and there are some countries who can produce same products for cheaper prices, and the country still cannot compete with developed countries, because the economy produce not so much high added value products. And in this situation, only robots can help, because this will this will keep prices low and allow China to produce as much as they were producing. And also this will solve the situation with aging population trend in China, because nowadays a lot of producers are interested in decreasing their level of employees in the factories, because already now let this open this slide. Yes, so because now it's around one robot costs 100 yuan. It's about $28,000, which capable of doing work for 3 people, can recoup its cost only in 22 months in the central provinces of China, and around 1 year in coastal cities, which are more developed. So next slide, please. And on the previous slide, we discussed main advantages, and now let's switch to risks of robotization for China. And of course, it is easy to understand that robotization can cause unemployment growth, and it may end up in public discontent, which is not in interests of government of China. So for this, they can only, to solve this problem in future, they can only use correct policy of retraining the population and increasing labor mobility, because nowadays it's not so easy to move between across country. And also they need to stimulate it as an education system to graduate workers and students with the appropriate skill set to allow them to find jobs on the market, because as it was said today, there is already a problem with graduates who cannot find a job after the university. So let's move to the next slide, please. And of course, in the situation with COVID-19, I want to discuss some effects of it on robotization. And the first effect is that only factories who are robotized and they have good production lines recovered really fast, and they didn't suffer from the crisis as much as other producers. And also Chinese government quickly responded to the epidemic, and there was some there were developed some robots who can help in identifying infected people. They can listen to the sound of the patient breath, and they can do ultrasound to identify COVID-19. So these robots really help, and they are used in hospitals to protect doctors and nurses. And the second, or the last one, the last point is that this crisis will definitely lead to increase of robotization level, and will faster it, because already now a lot of producers are trying to robotize their production line. They want to reduce their the amount of employees in the factories, because no one knows how it will increase, how the situation will develop in future. So this means only one thing, that Chinese government need to create a good strategy to cope with these problems, because they will appear faster than this was expected before. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very two good presentations from students of IBS RONEPA. I want first of all to say to all of you who follow or want to follow Chinese technology news, one of the best sources that I use every day is Sinotech. It is a Telegram channel. If you're interested, you can just ask me or ask in the chat, and I will send you the link to it. And one of the representatives of this, oh, we already have something. One of the representatives of this Telegram channel is Andrei Kapustin. Andrei, hello.
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Yes, thank you for your time. What do you think would Sino-Russian relations look like after all of this pandemic will be over? Will the cooperation that we have right now on fighting coronavirus help to boost our relations further, or this coronavirus will be somehow will have a bad influence on our relations? What's your thought about that?
Well, I think it will both have some good and some bad for the relations, but if we take a look at what it is right now, then we see that from Russia, we mainly export oil, gas, some raw materials. So evidently that after the crisis, there will be some economic recovery. We will still export the same. And for the Chinese, they export mainly machinery, and the coronavirus and the recovery from the coronavirus will not help us to make smartphones or cameras. So we'll still inevitably import it from China. For some time, I've been living in Southeast Asia, and in here we have some very good examples of how this so-called coronavirus politics helps to make relations even closer between the countries. For example, the premier of Cambodia visited Beijing during the pandemic in China, and also, well, not from this region, from Mongolia. The Mongolian leader also visited Beijing, and all these political moves helps these countries to get new credits from China, to get new machines and all this. So for countries that are smaller scale, it could work, this coronavirus moves cooperation. But for such countries as Russia, large scale countries, I think that coronavirus could be only one of the variables in this cooperation. And we can also take you see, the interesting point is that it is all interconnected somehow, because, for example, what also defines the cooperation between Russia and China is, for example, the relations of Russia and China with the United States, this triangle among the countries. And right now, the United States intend to tackle China somehow. But if Democrats will come on the next elections, then the situation may change. And the coronavirus is one of the stimulus for this. So it's a risk for Donald Trump. And all these interconnected factors may somehow change the composition of relations among the countries. But generally, I would say that coronavirus could only be one of the variables in the relations between Russia and China, and it will not impact much. And after the crisis, the relations will be back as they were before. For exporters, is the next question. If I have to. Yes.
You don't have to, but if you want to.
Yes, just a quick replay. Exporters, I think that the nations after the crisis will try to become more independent, more autonomous in economics. So in such spheres as ventilators, say, yes, in medicine, or some networks, the Russian government will try to make the country as independent from China, from import from China as it is possible, because if next crisis will come and Russia will not be prepared for it, then but I think that this could only be some, some exact spheres, and generally it will not also impact that much as the relations. So is it, and
Yeah.
the was,
Thank you very much. And in terms of experts, actually, Alexandra Novakshonova, a student of RNEPA, has a very great case study concerning pork exports from China. I guess, Alexandra, are you here?
Yes, hello Timur, hello everyone.
Hello.
Good evening. So I'm very glad that I can participate in our student conference, and now I would like to give you a brief about pork industry. So as you can see on the slides, there is main trends. So first of all, pork consumption is growing, so approximately 1% each year, and especially pork consumption is bigger than, for example, beef and poultry. So it depends on tradition that Chinese people like pork, and so because of it, China tried to provide the pork to its people, and so import. So as you can see, import is bigger than export because it's based on some reasons that China has had a big shortage of pigs from 2008, and so it began to import pigs to provide relevant amount of meat on the market, and to make prices a bit not so volatile, because if we will switch to the next slide, you can see that there is a big problem with pork prices. And as I said, problems began in 2008 when there was blue ear disease outbreak, and amount of pigs they just there was a big decline of pigs, and because of this, China became net importer of pigs, and so of pork meat, and so the main partners became USA and European countries, and then China was trying to somehow make price not so volatile. However, there are still some problems, and so forecasts said that in the future there will be still a big jump of prices because first there was African African swine fever, so and then this COVID-19. So it causes problem for pork industry and then to prices. So moving forward to the next slide, as I said, then after this outbreak of blue ear disease in 2008, there was African swine fever. So it was so it causes many problems to economy because, as I said, there was loss of approximately 2,000 million of pigs, and so of course it causes price the big jump of prices, and that fact that supply chain was unable to provide meat on the market, and of course it was a reason for big for big need of import and for opportunity to another countries to enter the market of China. But there were very strict requirements because China was afraid of African swine fever outbreak again, and so market was open for other countries, but somehow it was a bit fulfilled, and the situation was normal, but not for a long time, because market is still fight with some consequences of this African swine fever. So moving forward, there is another problem that pork industry also causes environment problem for China, and so African swine fever can be this like pork industry can be a reason why African swine fever began in China, because as you can see, the main problem in is pork manure, because and it also causes some air pollution, water pollution, solid pollution, and if we'll sum up all these factors, we will get this some I suppose possibilities of epidemics and pandemics, and to prevent these problems, Chinese government implements special ecological requirements, special financial support to farms, and they also removed some farms, for example, from water reservations, because some pigs just pollute some water sources, and it also lead to some epidemics, so cases. And another point is to implement biofuel process, because of very impressive industrial progress. There could be take some measures to provide biofuel from pork manure. So moving to the another, so moving further, there could be also some improvements in export and in industrial field itself. So there is strategy of Chinese digitalization. So on the slide there is like a whole idea about steps and what should be done, but I will tell you about some detailed things. So for example, in export, to provide so good quality, the good quality of meat, for example, there could be some implementation of robotics. As my colleague said, it's very so very progressive field, and very there is a great results of it. And also the Chinese manufacturers can use machine visions. Also, they can use some artificial intelligence to process some big data. And also there is these technologies of on fabrics on farms, for example, like online supervision of workers. So there could be some supervision of how employee does his work, and so based on the result, he will be paid, for example, a big amount or less amount of salary. And another point is pigs city. So it's like many floors farms that provide, for example, some so that provides the reduce of cost first, and then it will reduce possibilities of some diseases, because there will be, for example, special lifts for pigs, so separate rooms for pigs, so it will like the whole city for pigs. And moving forward to the next slide, there is forecast that Chinese pork market will grow, of course, because Chinese people won't stop eating pork, and of course there will be increase of middle class and urbanization, and so government will take measures to somehow prevent this volatility in the prices. And because of all this situation, there will be also possibility to remove some farms, pig farms, abroad. So it's like a new idea of government, and it's still in process. And so it's like strategic ideas, and further there can be some detailed detailed information. And another point is that Chinese will diversify its import, and so it's opportunity for Russia, because now Russia and China are considering the permission of Russian pork to enter Chinese market, but for example, beef from Russia and some poultry have had already entered the market, and so I suppose there is a positive trend in future. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really detailed case study on the sphere that not so many people that are into China watching are following, I guess. And I want to continue by another sphere of export, but that is not feasible. This is public diplomacy, and a lot of people actually who are following China talk about it all the time, about different kinds of strategies that China has to influence our minds and to influence the thing that we think about China. And Saviedi will talk about the public diplomacy of China in Russia. Saviedi?
Yeah, thank you for giving me a word. So can you hear me? Is everything right? Yeah, thank you.
Yep, everything is good. I want to interrupt you for a second. I want to say that there was a question for Alessia. Can you please answer it on a chat? Alessia Ivanuta, if you hear me, please answer the question in the chat. Thank you. And Saveli, yes.
In the chat, yes, Alessia.
Yeah, just write about it.
So yeah, I specifically answering the question, how does China use digital diplomacy to change its international image and change its image in Russia specifically? So yeah, to not to be confused, digital diplomacy is the same for e-diplomacy or electronic diplomacy and cyber diplomacy. I just use synonyms in my speech. So Chinese digital diplomacy in any country, not only in Russia, mostly consists of two things. So these are news agencies on social networks, their work there, and presence of diplomats. And I would say structures. Among those are embassies, consulates, and diplomatic missions, for example, in United Nations. So if you talk about Russia, the most popular ones you can see on the right on the slide, and among them, the most popular ones would be VK of Contacte and Twitter. So how do they behave? Do they form positive opinion about China in Russia and in and across the globe? In my opinion, yes, rather than no, because they conduct their activities in accordance with the party line, and every statement that they write is clearly verified. Can you switch on to the next slide, please, Timur? Yeah, thank you. So this table contains up-to-date information about major Chinese news agencies, newspapers, radio, television channels operating in the international arena. The second column, which is yellow, shows that Communist Party, or it is called CPC here, that Communist Party manages all organizations, either directly or through intermediaries. For example, you can see Global Times in the first column, and it is in submission to People's Daily, and People's Daily in the first column is in submission to CPC. So everything is controlled by CPC. What to say about state structures, to say embassies and people who work there. So cyber diplomacy requires leadership from the government. Yes, I agree, but ordinary people should play a major role in its implementation as well. So the opinions, this is a very huge risk and a significant problem, that the opinions of individual forums and interest groups are not taken into account in China's cyber diplomacy system. Big problem, they exist kind of separately. So even though it is People's Republic, they are a bit far from people in this question, in the sphere. Another significant thing and drastic problem, that government is suspected in strong propaganda too often. This is a huge risk for every country. So speaking of censorship, bright example. Can you switch on to the next slide? Yeah. Take a look at the historically special regions. Tibet, Xinjiang, so Inner Mongolia. It is not a secret that central authorities of China provide tough policy there. They pursue such a thing as like a violation of human rights. So everything is really tough there, and they use force. Despite the urgent need to discuss this situation, the information, for example, at Xinhua News official page in Contacte, this is on the right on your screens. And if you search hashtags Xinjiang and Tibet on Twitter, about 60% consists of beautiful landscapes and photos of animals. About 20% of information about local economic, different trade, political, social activity. And the remaining 20 is all about people of Xinjiang living and breathing, about like what they're doing, and it is also accompanied with many heartbreaking stories. And zero, like literally zero, not even 1% of information about the dreadful acts of aggression by the CPC. This creates another problem, lack of trust. So in difficult times for the country, how the state provide information, in what language, with what message? Do they observe the grammar even and punctuation marks? Do they delete comments? So how correctly they translate names even, or like official names? In the 21st century, in the information age, these factors are key in the formation good image of a country. So sometimes China behaves quite aggressively towards jokes. Can you, yes, next slide. So here is a Danish newspaper, Jyllands-Posten. It has published a kind of a caricature of a modified Chinese flag. You probably heard about this. Yellow stars are kind of replaced by a coronavirus pattern. And Chinese embassy in Denmark and all the diplomats on their Twitter pages, accounts, and embassies call the caricature an insult to China, and they ask to delete this. And Danish newspaper refused to apologize, and they were right, because there is a freedom of speech in the country, so in Denmark. I think that they were right. So they behave aggressively, and to give you, and this is a huge risk, and to give you a very bright example how do they behave, I conducted kind of a little bit of a research, and yeah, can you switch next slide? So this can be proven by a very simple and illustrative example. So in Tibet, a national flag, so the Tibet, this flag that you hear, it is prohibited, which is considered by the Chinese authorities as a symbol of separatism. So for the purity of the experiment, I created a new Twitter account under the name Save Tibet. And I used the new phone number, specially created email and another computer, so it would not be possible to be tracked by the IP address or whatever. So this is just for the purity of the experiment. And I have randomly chosen post of a random account of the random Chinese state party media. In our case, this is CGTN official. So this is China Global Television Network. You probably heard them before as CCTV. They just have another name now, but this is former CCTV. And I've chosen like a post about the success in the fight against coronavirus. And below in the comments, I leave the following. So Save Tibet, what you're doing there is against human rights. And I also attached the flag of Tibet. So it is not even connected to the Tibet. And the obvious result was not long coming. Can you click on the, so yeah, the next. So the next picture will, yeah. And about after like 20 minutes, a notification arrives that the page is temporarily blocked. I do not know if it's due to my comment or something else, but whatever. After restoring the account, the post was not deleted immediately. Yeah, but this happened after 5 hours after its publication, and this we can so you can see that the date is the same. So this is the same post, but there is no my comment. You can find this on Twitter and check it out. So after yeah. And so we can conclude that all the information that users see in official accounts is adjusted according to the party line, as I already said. And the Great Firewall of China works not only in mainland China, but in foreign social networks. And the last point to, can you, yes, they're not developing YouTube for some reason. I don't know. This is a good platform to provide information on. So the reputable global Times news agency has only 30,000 subscribers, and like they post videos only once in 1 or 2 days, and this is not enough. So to conclude, Chinese diplomacy in any country and in Russia, they are working good. Yes, they're working good, and they react to the problems very fast, as you could see from my research. But sometimes they can be too harsh and too aggressive, and they need to build trust among their followers, aka subscribers, aka people, and also they need to develop other foreign platforms. This is it. Thank you so much.
Savili, thank you so much. That was very, very good presentation. I would love to read the text, I guess, of your research, if you will publish it somewhere, or is it the part of your thesis? Anyway, I would love if you would send me.
I definitely will.
Yeah. Thank you. Still, we already talked about Chinese problems in economy, problems like in international relations, particularly in the relations with Russia. But China still has problems inside of it, and COVID-19 quarantine did not lock down all of the problems, especially social problems that China had all these times. And our last but not least part of the roundtable today will be dedicated to problems that China has with its stability, so-called. And I would love to give the speech right now to Alexey Chigataev from iMars. Hello, Alexey. He also is a author of a very, very interesting Telegram channel that you should follow. It's called Китайский городовой. Floor is yours.
Hello, guys. It's nice to meet you, all of you here today. It was a nice presentation, like everyone. I like all of these, and my studies are focused on the socio-economic issues, and it would be more social rather than economics. So I want to tell a few things about the social unrest and social stability in China, even in the sense of coronavirus. As we all knew, there are tens of thousands of protests in China each year, but the vast majority of them stay out of the headlines in China and overseas. They are typically small, localized demonstrations taking aim at specific problems of voicing concern of the specific issues, and as such don't represent a threat to Chinese stability. So overall, domestic opposition to the President Xi Jinping remains muted. So the Edelman Trust Barometer, please, that's a great, the great tool, Edelman Trust Barometer, right now measures the public's trust in various institutions. So it ranked China the most trusting among all nations served in 2019. So surveys find that most Chinese people are optimistic about their country's future, and perhaps Chinese people is simply convinced it's best way to stay quiet and make money. So there has certainly been plenty of money to go around. I want to pay attention to the different levels of social unrest and to the social stability in China. Right now we are out of time, so I will be quick as possible. The core issues of social unrest remain almost the same as it were a few years ago under the Hu Jintao administration. So, but it's obvious that coronavirus will give a new start for the new wave of protests in China. So if we look from the macro level, the first reason, of course, slowing growth in economy. Vasily, Raisa, all of the specialists today talk about that. So I wouldn't pay attention to that. And another one is inequality. Economists like Thomas Piketty, Li Yan, and Gabriel Zuckman estimate that the shares of national income and wealth taken in by China's top 1% have soared since the turn of the century. And there is an interesting phenomenon right now in China connected with the slowing growth. it called a phenomenon known as a revolution of rising expectation. So if you are living in a long-term stagnation, like in some not so good, also developed countries, you know that you accept this fate as normal, so you do not expect a high salary, well-developed, any case of that. But when you are living in China, when you are Chinese youngsters, and when you are living in China for 20 years on the rise, so it's like developed like year by year, so your expectations are very high. And right now, people like young Chinese youngsters, they faced this revolution of rising expectation. The core of the future issues for China, I mean for the social unrest, is the Chinese youngsters, because they want more, and it's obvious they wouldn't get one. So if we come to the micro level, the most popular, not the most popular, the not correct word, but according to the statistics, there is about 65% of all the total number of all civil disobedience act connected with land disputes. So it's some institutional issue, and we want to pay attention in connection with coronavirus today. So we move forward to the labor conflicts and the environmental disputes. So speaking about the labor conflicts, the question is not a growing level of an average wage, but the distribution of that by places of living, professions, and types of employer. The rich people become richer and the poor labor force remains poor. So that is why the first reason provoked labor conflicts are growing gap between the poorest and the richest social classes. Another issue is the protection of workers' human rights. And the last one is the increasing needs of social guarantees. So right now, this issue is on the rise because during the coronavirus, all of the Chinese people realized they do not have any human rights, workers' human rights, I mean, and it's not protected at all. And the social guarantees, that's very important for the people all around the world. So, and if you're talking about the socialistic society, so at least you need to have some social guarantees. And another point we have to pay attention is the environmental disputes. So as we already mentioned, there is no enough information covering land and labor disputes. So we almost know nothing about that. There is no any publication in Russian, in English, in Chinese. So we have to get this information from the social media, etc. But as for the environmental disputes, in contrary, it should be noted that the acts of civil disobedience on the basis of environmental issues have received the most complete coverage of both the Chinese and foreign media. And this coronavirus outbreak reveal that China can share the information, can share the real information as real as it's possible, and want to demonstrate its openness in environmental issues. So as a result of my speech, what do we expect right now from China, from the Chinese society? We expect the rise of conflicts, the rise of civil disobedience movement, in the case of labor conflicts and environmental disputes. So these would be the hot points, and it would be very interesting to look at that, to watch that. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer.
Thank you so much, Alexei. I guess if anyone has questions, they can write directly to you or to everyone in the chat form. As you mentioned, Alexei, one of the main reasons of protests in China right now is inequality. And I guess our next speaker knows a lot about gender inequality in China because she's following all of these news about that. Anastasia Muravyova, one of the authors and editors of Sinotech, Telegram channel, and can I say Yanshin scholar of
I guess,
uh,
can be
great.
said.
So what is the influence of COVID-19 almost 3 months long quarantine on the situation with equality, gender equality in China?
So, as we all know, we all suffer from different social problems, and the pandemic kind of brought them all up to the light of everyone. And I will start by adding to the ecology what is happening there. And the thing is that after the China went through the whole epidemic situation, there was a lot of plastic waste or just waste in general that is connected to healthcare or treating COVID-19 patients. And it all created this question, what should be done with it? Because before that, people will just only start to learn 3 R's, that is like to recycle, reuse, and reduce. And right now, obviously, the pandemic brought a lot of waste, so it is already impossible to reduce. The other question is how it's going to be recycled, because as studies show, there are different windows of time where during which the virus can live on different surfaces, and for plastic it starts from 3 days. So it is a question whether all of the plastic or stuff like that going to be washed and disinfected. It will still require a lot of water supplies for that. So again, not the best situation. And whether it's still going to be recycled anyway, or it's just going to be a waste or burned down, which is not going to be a great situation. There were a few reports that right now over 20 cities in China, including Wuhan and being, again, the worst city in that case, they're struggling to dispose the waste safely. And as in Wuhan, there was a huge hospital built in a week. They also had to build a plant with a capacity of 30 tons within 15 days. And before the peak in Wuhan, there was a lot of medical waste, but at the peak it was over 240 tons per day. So right now it is a big question what to do with that. Another question is that we all know that China is service-oriented, as Raisa previously mentioned, and a lot of people just switched to online and deliveries, online shopping, everything. But it again created demand for a lot of packaging, and mostly a lot of businesses would use plastic because it is more accessible, it is easier to use, and it is cheaper usually in that sense. Although China's lockdown did reduce air pollution, but this was again a temporary outcome. It is understandable that the situation will change, and it's already changing as factories start to work at their full capacity. And despite this short-term decision to have lockdowns all over the country, it brought more problems towards recycling sphere, as last year the government was trying to impose a lot of strict rules on recycling everyday waste of people, and now it is really hard, as still there is manual work needed to recycle the waste. Still it is really hard to recycle everything that was touched by food, fat and stuff like that, because it has to be washed before, and there are limitations what can be recycled and what has to be just thrown out or burned down. As during the first section of the whole thing, people were talking about what it brings to the economy, I would not pay attention to the poverty, because I didn't really find much information on how it how it affected the market yet. And I understand that for China, it's going to show later. What is really what is the world is struggling with, and China too, is especially China, because they still have this gender gap, is gender imbalance and inequality. And it is true that the virus affects physically men more often, but there are different sides of the pandemic, and the most important part is that as we talk about the pandemic, it is really important to say that it is mostly women who fight for lives of people everywhere, because for the world, it's over 80% of people in the healthcare are women. And in China, they're like almost half of doctors are female, but 90% of nurses, those who are the front line, always contact with patients, they are the most, like their lives, their mental health is at stake. And also, it's not only because they're saving lives daily, it's also because they have this extreme stress, and they develop severe mental issues, or they're afraid that they're gonna bring the disease outside hospitals, and that might infect their loved ones, their families, or just people outside, because as we know, it is a highly contagious virus, and it's not really needed to talk to the person. You can just touch the surface where the virus is still existent, and you can have it. So yeah, well, again, it doesn't really, it is not really spoken about, but the biggest impact is that there are a lot of deliveries that are necessary for people that fight for lives in clinics or hospitals. But again, a lot of people forget that most of the people who care about those who are infected by the virus are women, and they, for example, sometimes forget about needed sanitary products for women, which is a big issue all over the world, but during pandemic it rose. Another issue is a rise of domestic violence. It is talked about all over the world, and the simple reason for that, not only that people stay indoors with their partners or their families, or someone who is abusive towards them, but it's also due to that people go through extreme anxieties while they are locked in their rooms or apartments. A lot of people lose their jobs or don't get paid enough. There's just a lot of things that is influencing that. And as most of, like, two categories that are most impacted by domestic violence are women and children, and they are the most to be affected by the virus itself. There was a quite interesting study done by a professor from Hangzhou, and he conducted a study where he asked over 1,000 healthcare workers from 34 clinics with COVID positive patients, and 76% were women. And he found out that people who treat people with COVID-19 are 52% of them are more likely to have symptoms of depression, 57% are more likely to have symptoms of anxiety, and 60% more likely to experience distress, and almost 3 times as likely to have insomnia than those who are not on the front line. Again, it is really important to address that. And as we'll talk about it, it's again, it's a huge issue, and because there was a rise of domestic violence threefold in Hubei province this year compared to last year, and we're only in April right now. So yeah, already not the best situation. And according to one of the NGOs, 90% of the cases reported during the pandemic were violence related or anxiety and violence related. It is a big issue. I have to address that China does have the anti-domestic violence law. It was introduced in 2016, but it has showed itself during the pandemic very ineffective because it did not save victims. And as the result, as lockdowns went down, there were a lot of divorces. But again, not a lot of, well, firstly, not a lot of cases of domestic violence get reported, and not all of them end up as a divorce or a separation. So yeah, China has been criticized for anti-domestic violence law, and the pandemic has shown that it is ineffective, and that something should be changed maybe about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very great observation of the difficulties that Chinese society facing right now. And now I want to turn to Tatiana Sidorkina, who want to tell us about Hong Kong protests and how COVID-19 pandemic influenced it. And I guess this is what's going on in Hong Kong is the representation of all of the problems that China has. Tatiana?
Yes. Good evening, dear experts, participants, and guests of the conference. The topic of my speech is stages of political and economic interaction in the Hong Kong. And can I use the demonstration of my screen?
Sure. Let me switch off mine. Mm-hmm. One second. Yep.
One second, please. The topic of my speech is the stages of political and economic interaction between Hong Kong and China. The question of the Hong Kong role in international politics and the world economy is relevant in the connection with the statements of PRC interaction opponents in 2019. It's worth mentioning that Hong Kong has been a kind of link between the Asian world and the countries of Europe since the beginning of the 12th century, which is undoubtedly a consequence of the colonial British past of the island. It's worth noting that in 1948, Hong Kong wasn't the part of China, but has already been in lease from the UK during 51 years. The first period can be considered the first stage of political and economic interaction between Hong Kong and China. The revolution in China and the formation of PRC had a direct impact on the development of Hong Kong. English laws and English government have made Hong Kong one of the places of attraction for Chinese migrants who won't agree with the establishment of the communist power on the mainland. Opponents of the new Chinese government settled on the island and began to develop business, politics, and culture. Hong Kong became the site of an anti-communist propaganda campaign organized by representatives of the intelligentsia. The change of power on the mainland and anti-colonial protests around the world had affected the population of Hong Kong, which led to the protest against British authorities. Seeing the threat to the stability of the political system, the colonial government took actions against people suspected of communist propaganda. However, there was a discord in the political sphere, but there were a lot of positive changes in economic sphere. After the formation of PRC, China's share in Hong Kong's foreign trade began to increase again. Hong Kong has acquired the function of a keyhole in the door for both the world community to China and for the China to the world community. There was opened the general consultates of 15 Western countries. Thus, the first period is characterized by improved economic relations and the complexity of political relations in connection with the revolution in China. Unfortunately, the Korean War became an obstacle to the emerging Hong Kong-China relations. The Hong Kong, due to its colonial affiliation, imposed restriction on the supply of products to China. These events represent the second stage of Hong Kong-Chinese relations. Later, the region found itself in a difficult economic situation as the US authorities imposed a US embargo, and UN has also accepted a resolution for the common embargo on the China and the territories associated with its economic relations. China has suffered significantly from the breakdown of economic relations with Hong Kong, as it has lost a number of essential goods and a key market for goods. After the settlement of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula, economic relation between China and Hong Kong returned to the form of interaction like on the first stage. These economic relations were beneficial for both sides. The PRC received a hard currency and the island met the needs of its market. However, during the Cultural Revolution, exports declined for political reasons. The events of Cultural Revolution had a direct impact on Hong Kong. Trade unions became the center of anti-colonial movement. Pressure of the British administration led to first measure of state of emergency in 1967. There were also changes in external policy. In 1972, the Chinese representative in United Nations organization provided a memorandum to the Committee on Decolonization of UN, and there was stated that Hong Kong was a part of Chinese territory occupied by England, and it cannot be considered independent. England tried to extend the lease agreement in 1979, but negotiations were unsuccessful, which worsened relations between PRC and the colonial government. In the 1960s and 1970s, China was industrializing, and Hong Kong was expanding the banking sector, which would be the key to the development of the island in the future. A distinctive feature of the formed banking sector was the increasing role of China, which was a new form of interaction between the mainland and the island. The most famous banks were the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, Bank of China, and Bank of East Asia. They were established during this period and now are operating also. It is also worth noting that the Hong Kong port was one of the largest in the region, and it was also used by Chinese entrepreneurs. Intensive economic relations between China and Hong Kong continued to develop after 1978, when the Chinese leadership took a course to expand contacts with the world. Hong Kong entrepreneurs have become actively invested in the mainland economy, and Hong Kong capital has found application in special economic zones in China. Thus, the second period is characterized by changes in economic relations and the complexity of political relations due to the Cultural Revolution in China and the restoration of China membership in the UN. So, the third stage is characterized by the transfer of Hong Kong to mainland China, and negotiations were held for 2 years, and the result was a joint declaration on the issue of Hong Kong. It should be also noted that the agreement is based on the principle one country, two system, and according to it, Hong Kong could maintain its Hong Kong has independent legislation and economic system, which help to maintain a favorable investment climate and laws aimed at the development of entrepreneurship and foreign trade in Hong Kong. Thus, the third period is characterized by economic stability and the settlement of the political situation and legal status of Hong Kong. So, and the last but not least period is connected with the integration of Hong Kong into PRC on special conditions. In the 2000s, the role of Hong Kong as a trade intermediary in China's foreign economic relations weakened, which was due to the transition of China to a market economy and an increase in volume of independent trade. However, economic interaction between China and Hong Kong has remained in the form of trade and mutual investment. These forms of economic interaction were fixed in the CEPA trade agreement. The terms of this agreement call for setting zero tariff barriers on most goods exported and imported between island and mainland. And it is also called for implementing measures for trade liberalization. But political sphere has faced a lot of challenges. So in Hong Kong, on the 1st July, demonstrations are held annually to show the reluctance of the local population to become part of the People's Republic of China. The PRC, in turn, is trying to influence the island by amending legislation and proposing various reforms. So in 2003, it was a speech against the adoption of the law of on national security, also known as Article 23. Critics argued that this legislation would undermine freedom of speech. China also tried to influence on education by introducing patriotic education classes in Hong Kong schools in 2012, and also the third China's attempt to affect the Hong Kong's policy was in 2014, and it was a problem with the voting process in Hong Kong, but China faced an opposition, and the demonstration lasted for 79 days, and there were a lot of participants, and their number exceeded 1 million people. And the latest example of the problems of political interaction is the extradition law problem in 2019, and the island reaction also was not very calm. So this situation proves of the negative attitude of island population to the mainland authorities. Thus, it should be noted that throughout the period under review, the economies of Hong Kong and China were interconnected, and interdependent. With this is evident in the sphere of investment in the development banking sector, in trade, tourism, and so on. However, there are many challenges in the political sphere that remain relevant today, mostly related to different political regimes and in these countries. That's all.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. That was a very good brief representation of what is going on in Hong Kong, and I guess it is very important for us to know. I want to turn right now to the Q&A session. I know that our discussion has taken way more time than we planned to, but we had a very many speakers, and I hope it was interesting for all of you. So the question in the chat was from Vasily about the perception of Chinese society on what is the origin of this virus, of this new coronavirus. Is there anyone who maybe read any research on that or something like that? Let me know. I think that we all understand that it's really difficult to conduct any survey in the conditions of Chinese political system, and I personally haven't seen anything that can be trusted or something like that. But if we look at what is the major topic for Chinese propaganda right now, and has been for the last several months, is that first of all, the virus came out in the market, and this was the fault of the Wuhan authorities and the authorities of the Hubei province that were not very active in localizing the virus at the very beginning. So I guess those people who follow the Chinese news, who watch Chinese TV, they think that everything happened there. And another thing is this finger pointing that was actually started by the diplomat Zhao Lijian, the representative of the Chinese Foreign Affairs. He has a very active Twitter, Trumpish style, and he was the one who said that that the virus was brought by U.S. Army in the late November to Wuhan during some exercises, military exercises there. And this actually was caught by the Chinese media. I guess it's not, it won't be a surprise that some people do think that this virus was not originated in China, but was brought to China by Americans or Italians. There was another article in, if I'm not mistaken, Zhenmin the People's Daily, that there is some kind of research that proves that virus was found in Italy. So I guess Chinese society also believes in some kind of conspiracy theories about that. On that, I want to thank every single person for this terrific discussion that we had. Also, I want to thank the organizers, teachers, tech guys who helped us to conduct everything. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was a good way to spend your Friday night, and you don't and you're not sad that you are not talking in the Zoom with your friends, but with us. And I want to give the floor to Irina Iosifovna, one of the organizers and teachers in IBS, and my teacher as well. Thank you so much, Irina Iosifovna.
No, I didn't plan to really didn't plan to say anything, but really I was quite impressed by what happened in this section. All the sections were extremely impressive, each in its own style, which is natural because people are different, moderators are different with different experience and attitude. But this session sort of impressed me immensely from the point of view it was truly academic, which can be probably explained with a number of experts, mature experts, people with their points of view, with their scientific field. And then in another chart there, the chart which is where participated the teachers from our chair of foreign languages. And one of them asked me recently, everybody was looking, many people was watching you. And they asked me why this session, unlike others, were called roundtable, not a panel discussion. And this is the question I probably would like to refer to the moderator, but I gave the answer that, and it was roundtable indeed, because there were few students, student presenters, more mature experts, and the points of view and the issues they were discussed were quite far from already from the general knowledge, generally accepted points or whatever. It was like absolutely topical, talking about very hot points, which is hot now, just right, very hot. Very topical points that were expected. Said, we don't need to copy paste virtues or whatever, some information from Wikipedia. We want to know what is happening right now and what is in store for us in the foreseeable future, because we all understand that the world is not going to be what it used to be before all this started. It's serious. And in the beginning, it seemed that, oh, okay, today, tomorrow, but now we see that even if we go out of our chambers where we're contained, but nevertheless, the life is not going to be the same. We will revisit all the values and all the styles of all the manners and all the many ideas. And this is the preparatory period, probably for us, starting for us to think and rethink the past and plan for the future. Thank you very, very much. It was really impressive.
Thank you.
Students.
Thank you. And thanks to...
Thank you for coming and spending your Thanks God Friday with us. And I must say that it was a really big online event, probably the biggest I have seen, not only our expert that was in the education section, our expert Timothy Meskin, is the vice president of this accreditation organization, AACSB, which IBS is now the honored holder, whatever. He telephoned to me after the session was over, and he said, I must say, like you, Timur, that I'm quite accustomed to online events, but it is the biggest online event I have seen so far. And the same was the estimation from another expert. It is the leading expert of the academic center for digital transformation of executive managers, something like that. And he said the same. So I very much appreciate that both students took part and the experts which you brought with you from Center Carnegie and other institutions, it's a mark. So it's, you know, it's a level we all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm also very happy to see so many interested people in China, and I'm happy to call you all to join our China watching community if you want to know about what is really going on in China. Please let me know. I will add you to our newsletter, to our Facebook channel, Telegram channel. We're everywhere, and we're happy to see new faces there. So thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Can I say another word about
yeah,
Russia?
sure.
Yeah, Russia and China. Just we're finishing, because Russia and China will always, there is a belief that will always dominate the world history and geography. And because, for example, today and yesterday, these are the days of, there are many nations in the world, these are the days of Jewish Passover. And in this respect, I want to remember that in Torah, the Old Testament, you said, I don't know how in China, what do they think about their hieroglyphs, but in Hebrew, every letter of this century of this book, holy text, is equally valuable. If even one letter is destroyed, the book is thrown away and reprinted. So in this book, the last 3 letters read Resh, Sin, Tav, Russia, China, the end. So the the world history will, if it ends, it will end with something happening with or between these 2 powers.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to end this discussion. And I'm happy if you have any question, reach out to me. Yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Very fruitful discussion.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Vasily.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
Sareli.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks and bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Raisa Alexeyevna, thank you so much.